This is this is going to be recorded, so whoever missed the beginning and feels that there's some worthwhile content they might like to hear, it's my pleasure to be able to send it to you should you ask. Just to tell you where we are, we're in Perek Yud Zayin, 17th chapter of Ezekiel, and there are another, I think, 3 or 4 chapters till Ezekiel actually is permitted to speak. Hasn't spoken yet. And if you look at this Perek, the entire nature of the Perek is mapped out in Pasuk Beis. Pasuk Beis says, "Ahivar Hashem Elai Lemar." Ben Adam, we know that. Chud Chida. He says, pose a riddle, umishol moshol, and describe with a parable al Beis Yisrael. So what are we going to be talking about? Got to understand the purpose of the whole Sefer of Yechezkel is Yechezkel from Golus is paralleling to some degree Yirmiyahu in Yerushalayim in the times prior to Churban Bayis Rishon, the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. And it's almost as though we're building a case. Why the Rebbeinu Shalom had to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, why it happened, who were the major players. And this chapter is actually about, it is about a nesher. We'll talk about what a nesher is. It says ha'erez, which is a cedar, hagefen, which is a grapevine, and hafaras habris, the hafarat is the reversal, the abrogation, I guess is a proper word, of the covenant by Tzidkiyo and what resulted from that. Now, the first thing we do is we're going to look at the word nesher. Nesher appears twice. There are 5 sections of this parak, and the sections are as follows. The first one is the first nesher. So now I'll say, what is a nesher? A nesher, and I believe we did it this morning, we spoke about it, Richard. A nesher, okay, Dove is coming, okay, let me wait a second till Dove comes in. Okay, let's see if Dove is here yet. Here's Dove. Shalom Aleichem, Dove. Shalom Aleichem, Dove sideways. Shalom Aleichem, Dove right ways. How are you, Tzaddik?
Okay.
Okay, so we're going back, Perek Yud Zayin, and I just said, and this is being recorded, and anybody who asks, I'll be happy to send you the recording.
I just want Dove to know I sent him a bag of pistachio nuts. I hope he got them.
Very nice, Marvin. Nesher. What's a nesher? And as I said, I started to say when Dove entered the room, a nesher is translated as an eagle. It's also translated as a vulture or a buzzard. And when I was speaking with Rabbi Feiner today, it was my great suchus have Rabbi Feiner called me. I talked about many years ago. At this point in time, it's probably 6 or 7 years ago when we made a siyum, a real elaborate siyum befitting 7-year study of Sefer Yeshayahu. And I spoke about the nature of prophecy. Very pompous and presumptuous of me, but it happens to be that the introduction to Sefer Yeshayahu in the Abarbanel and the Malbim have a big machlokus. They have a dispute. Does the Navi choose the words? Or is he given the message and the setting as a whole to transmit? My personal belief, based upon nothing than the fact that every Navi has a different style. Yechezkel is really very and emblematic of that. Every Navi has different ways of expressing things. So when I talked about that, because you guys who weren't at that siyum, I talked about the nature of what our American quote unquote culture considers prophets, oracles, spokespeople for the times. And so, the spokespeople for the times are poets, songwriters. They deal with the popular culture. And I brought various examples of how things are looked at. And the final example I brought, because he was just nifter at that time, was Leonard Cohen, Zichron Livracha, who was a beautiful Yid and who had many, many important things to say. Why am I bringing this up now? He has a magnificent, magnificent song called The Story of Isaac. And it's the perspective of Yitzchak Avinu walking hand in hand with Avram Avinu, Al Har HaMoriah, to be sacrificed. And he says, I looked up, he says, and I thought I saw an eagle, but it might have been a vulture. I said to myself, Leonard Cohen knew Torah. You don't write that line unless you know what it means. So, what is a nesher? Nesher could be an eagle, very regal symbol. Nesher can be a buzzard, which is a bird of prey, which an eagle is also, by the way. So, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with Tzidkiyahu, who we were way done with in Sefer Yirmiyahu, and here he appears again as a precursor to the events that happened and the siege that Nebuchadnezzar was successful in besieging and destroying the Beis Hamikdash. So I'm using, and Rabbi Feiner asked me if I knew of the book, the original art scroll, Yechezkel, the order of which is Rabbi Moshe Eisman, who is a bona fide genius. And I said, yes, he happens to be open on my desk right now with the other 8 Svarim. But I'm going to refer to this as our introduction to what we're going to learn. The introduction may even be more interesting than the Torah itself. And it says, if you open up, which is why I asked you to have a Tanakh, if you'll open up, we'll start with a reference in our very own Sefer. Perek Yud Bey's Pasuk Hey. Perek Yud Bey's Pasuk Hey says, Le'einehem chasar lecha vakir v'hotzesa vo. And he says, and before their eyes, dig through the wall and bring forth through it. What's he bringing forth himself? I mean, this is how he's going to escape Yerushalayim under siege. And I looked at the footnotes on the bottom of the art scroll, the old art scroll, and it says, dig through the wall, excavate it, and through this you shall escape. And we're talking about Tzidkiyahu, who would escape from the city through a cave. It says Metzudas David. Now, no mention is made there of an excavation. And Radak points out that this omission presents no difficulty, which is the point we're going to raise now. It says, scriptures frequently relate an occurrence and describes its details elsewhere. It should be noted that no mention is made in any of the sources that he quoted later on of anything being carried on the shoulder, for the fact that Tzidkiyahu covered his face. And I said, yeah, but no mention is mentioned in any other sources. There are many sources alluding to this pasuk. And it says over here, in pasuk Beis, he says, Ben Adam chud chida. He says, make a riddle. And then he says, Mishal Mashal, he says, and describe with a parrot. Why? Why? So firstly, what is a chida? What's a mashal? The Vilna Gaon on Mishlei defines a mashal as something that can be understood independently without reference to the concept it illustrates. It is a mashal only because it is being used to illustrate something else. Otherwise, it would be a story. A chidah, a riddle, is also a parable, in the sense it's used to illustrate another thing, but in contrast to a mashal, it cannot stand alone. That to which it alludes is unknown, it can't be understood. So the parable in this chapter, which ascribes human qualities to eagles and trees, as we will see, is a chidah, meaning a riddle, as well as a mashal. Without knowledge of the story alluded to, the listener cannot fathom it. Kud chidah. So the question is, why? Why? Why can't we be told a story? But we can't be told a story because God says, don't tell a story. I want to do this in this particular fashion. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to look at the Das Mikra, which I was telling our friend David, to whom we wish a really speedy refuah shlema, and have all of his bits and parts all together really soon, so you can go skiing and break something else. So it says, in this parak, he says, in case anybody has the Das Mikra, it's a Daf Kuf Hey, he says, I'm going to translate, the Navi dissects or analyzes the development of the political events in the years surrounding the Churban. He says, and he concludes, what? He says, Ein monos, there's no escape in Hagoral from the fate Hamar, the bitter fate, Hamitzapeh lemefer habris, Utzidkio HaMelech. There is no escaping the person who breaks the covenant. There's no escaping his bitter fate, especially since the person he reneged on was the ruling superpower at the time, the cruel Nebuchadnezzar. It says, in allusions in this parak and the foundation of what is known from the story, in Melachim Beis parak Chaf Gimel, Mem Beis Chaf Gimel through Chaf Hey, the events are known. Yirmiyahu also tells it in Prakim Chav Zayin, Lamed Vav, Lamed Tes, and from our story, which will come out in a few Prakim in Perak Yud Tes and in Perak Chav Daled, it is possible to reconstruct these events in order to understand the Nevuah and overlay one on top of the other. So this is Das Mikra in a magnificent Hebrew. These events were not told here, bitsura shikufa. That means in a transparent and understandable manner. It says, muvenis lakol, that would everybody can understand. Go bisharma komos b'mikra. He says, like we find in other places in Tanakh. It says, Ella b'signon shel mashal chida. Says, in the style of a parable and a riddle. And he says, the saruf shnei ha-musagim, and the combination of these two concepts, mashal and chida, alludes to a mashal, shetochno, says sasum. Its content is hidden, the miktsas, somewhat, so, and its understanding requires a measure of knowledge and ability. Or al nu'um shiri, poetic, allegorical, big words. Al kol panim, no matter what. Pisron, the meaning of this chidah, this riddle, yel mashal, would be about like what? He says mashal, he says now he says chidah, he says korot beis Yisrael, the history of Am Yisrael. It says kosha likvoa bevadaus. You can't be certain madua bachar Yechezkel derech haba'ah. Why did he choose this form of transmission? Ach hahashva'ah, the comparison, imshar makoros hamikra, with the other events in the Torah, in Tanakh, meviya osano lehesber leshimush b'sigdon hazeh. We got to analyze why he's doing it. And I read this next line to Rabbi Feiner, and he went, whoa. So what does he say? The other sources we use was Sefer Malachim and Sefer Yirmiyahu. We'll get to those psukim. I will read them to you. It says, where were they written? They were written in Eretz Yisrael. So what? Hanavi Yachol Lomar Es Dvarav Begoli. You have something to say it. The only person you have to worry about is your next door neighbor who's stab you in the back. But you're only dealing with your own people. Below chol chashash me ayin hara, ayin ra'a. You're not worried about somebody putting an evil eye on you. It means more than an evil eye. It means putting an evil action on you. Not so with Yechezkel. Where did he live? Bavel. And this mashal chida type of speaking, he says, about actual things, he says, from the mouths of the politicians and the authors and the poets who are living, he says, in an oppressive environment. Harehu min hamifur well known, that yesh raglayim ledavar, meaning you say something, it's going to get out there. Yechezkel nizhar means he was cautioned. Shelo linkov b'shmo seim. No, linkov means to make a nekev. Don't stick your needle into the bubble and burst it. Shel anashim hame aravim, who are involved b'inyan shu medaberbo. Don't be very specific about who you are talking about, because there will be consequences. You are an exiled nation in somebody else's country, and they're not your friends. It says, who mishaneh es hashemos. He changes names hamakomos of places. Mahaya etzem cheshasho. What was the essence of his suspicion? It says uvimi hashash, and who was he suspicious of? Lo baror lanu. We don't know for sure. It says avol efshar lahaniach. We can posit shehishtamesh b'mashal chida toch hashash l'sakana. It was a dangerous time, and he used these roundabout, poetic, indirect manner of describing events because it was dangerous. Hu nizar gam b'sha'a shehu poser es achida, and he's also told when he is explaining what he meant. In other words, the style of this Navi is, I'm going to give you a mashal, and then I'm going to tell you what it meant, just in case you didn't get it the first time. We're smart guys. We're living, millennia later, and we can figure it out. He says that the time when he explains it, he's cautioned. That's when the first 10 psukim are the mashal and the chida, and then psukim yud aleph through yud ches, the next 8 psukim, he says, even though that the meaning, he says, are not allegorical in and of themselves. Certainly no lo nemar b'pumbi. He did not say this publicly. Ela bi'oznei yechidim. This was said to the individuals, people from the Zikanim, says, who are, regulars, who would sit in front of him. And in this explanation, he mentions Bavel below Ir Rochlim, which is what he calls it. In other words, when he was talking to his friends, he used a different terminology than that which got out publicly. And Mitzrayim, those are the 2 subjects over here. Aval adayin eino mazkir shmo seim shel melachim. He doesn't mention the names of the kings who are here. And those kings are Nebuchadnezzar and Paro Nichra. He says, and also he doesn't mention the king of Yehuda, which was Tzidkiyahu. And his care, he says, in his, I'm trying to see, I read my handwriting, in his public appearances, it's perhaps that it is necessary because of the sense of danger that they will use their rulership in Bavel on his words and on the abrogation of the bris of Tzidkiyahu is l'ra'asam, to do badly. He says, al arikim mitzvah Tzidkiyahu. Arik, David, Ayin Reish Yud.
Deserters.
Thank you. Deserters from Tzidkiyahu's army, maybe it's still used against them, who reached Bavel. There were deserters from the army, and they got to Bavel too. You know, it's kind of like Yamashim Zichram Hadil Elef Havdalos. You know, the Nazis who would take off their uniforms and put on the garb of the prisoners so they could escape. And these were people who wanted to blend in with the relatively safe environment that the Jews found where Talmud Bavli and most of our learning took place. He says, and they'll be guilty of a lack of loyalty to the king. He says, and this is where the events unfolded. He says in our parak, Nebuchadnezzar, Hasheni Melech Bavel, Chizekis Ma'amado B'Kadmas Asya, in Eastern Asia. Kedem is east, David?
Could be.
I think Kedem is east, Eastern Asia. He was strengthening his hold in East Asia, and he in order to accomplish his important objective, and which was what? Mitzrayim. He wanted to conquer Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is very important to him. Shahasholitim hamekomiyim haketanim yunem onim lo. Yehoyachin lo zachal le'emuno. He said, the small little pissant nations, they're going to fall in line. But his objective was Mitzrayim. And let's leave that introduction over there and say, so he's saying, why did he use obscure language? He used obscure language because he couldn't speak explicitly, because he was cautioned by his own people, and because they were literally exilees in an unfriendly nation, even though they really got, we flourished under that nation. Okay. So next I looked at just what is this parak about? Just the first piece of it. I looked at Tova Gonzel's book on Yechezkel, and just so you should know, Rabbi Sachs, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Bracha, translated the Torah for this magnificent Tanakh. If you don't have it, it comes in many, many sizes. And this Tanakh is incredible, with an index and the words of Rabbi Sachs, one of the most eloquent spokespeople of our time. And guess what? One of the editors and translators of not the Torah portion, but the Tanakh portion, was Dr. Tova Gonzel. She's among them. So she says about this chapter, it says, Tzidkiyahu's rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar. Yechezkel poses a riddle and a parable. Tzidkiyahu's death is one part of their interpretation, owing to the people's stubbornness in refusing to accept the message of Yechezkel's prophecies. The prophet employs a range of devices aimed at convincing them. At this point, he adds the riddle. In other words, it's a prophetic convention. What he's using. How do you break through to these stubborn people? So let me try a riddle. Let me try a mushal, a parable, to get through to them.
Hashem told him to do a little mushal.
Hashem told him, yeah.
So this
right.
wasn't his initiative, right? It was Hashem saying, do it this way.
Okay, which brings us back to the original conversation we've had many, many times. What is the actual role? Is the Navi a talking monkey? Or is the Navi a messenger who has some freelance abilities? And I told you it's Machlokas,
Right.
Abarbanel and Malbim on what his range is. Now, the content, Psukim 1 through 10, the great eagle. The parable, the mashal, begins by describing an impressive eagle that comes from Lebanon, which seizes the top of a cedar and brings to, quote, the land of the traders. Land of traders is Bavel. It then takes, quote, some of the seed of the land, planting it in a fertile field containing plenty of water. And a low wild vine begins to grow. Thereafter, a fruitful relationship develops between that vine in its fertile habitat and another great eagle, which will come on later, which is Mitzrayim. But the vine cuts itself off from its field, even though it is well planted and flourishing. In fact, it has no need for the favors of this eagle. And the parable concludes with Yechezkel addressing two rhetorical questions to his audience. First, can the vine cut off from its roots possibly flourish? It's going to wither. Second, even when the vine is still planted in the ground, how can it flourish? It'll wither when the east wind comes. So that's Dr. Ganzel's approach. And continuing with Rabbi Eisenman says. So he says, we're given a description of Tzidkiyahu's rebellion against the Nebuchadnezzar. In contrast to what it says in Melachim Beis and Yirmiyahu Nun Beis, and I'll give you the words. In Melachim Beis, the words are, Ben Esrim v'achas shana, Tzidkiyahu b'molcho, v'achas esrei shana malach b'Yushalayim, and he ruled for 11 years in Yerushalayim.
21.
V'shem imo Hamitol bas Yirmiyahu may livna. Hamitol, daughter of Yirmiyahu, says, Vayas hara b'nei Hashem kechol asher asa Yehoyakim. This is problematic because the Gemara tells us that under the righteous Chizkiyahu, they say was Tzaddik Gomor. Even young boys and girls were expert in Tumantara, with the result that Sancherib's mighty army died. You guys know this from Yeshayahu. In one night, 185,000 able-bodied, strapping young men died in their sleep on the eve of their conquest, impending conquest in Yerushalayim, which was Erev Pesach, which was the Seder night. What were the Yid in Yerushalayim doing? Were they crying? No, they were saying the Haggadah because it was Pesach. Hashem took care of the business for them. Why? Because Chizkiyahu and Yerushalayim were tzaddikim. Jerusalem in Chizkiyahu's time was impregnable. Why? It was a fortress of learning. So, how did he do that which is wrong in the eyes of God? So let's continue to look. And what does he say in Yirmiyahu 52:3? All it says in Yirmiyahu 52:3, you find it, is Ben Esrim v'achas shana Tzidkiyahu, to repeat, B'molcho, v'achas esrei shana malach b'Yerushalayim, 11 years in Yerushalayim, Shemi Mo Hamital Bas Yirmiyahu me livna, exactly what we had before. It says, Vayas hara b'nei Hashem, kol asher asa Yehoyakim. An exact repeat. Are we given any detail as to what he did was wrong? The answer is no.
Give it to me. Just give it to me. I'll take it. Don't forget.
Take it. The answer is no. The next pasuk says, "Ki al af Hashem Isab Yerushalayim." God's anger was there. The Yehuda, Ahishlichu Osam, the Alpanav, cast them from before him. Ayimrod Sigiyahu, the Melech Bavel. I mean, we're giving marginally more detail, not a lot. I mean, and it continues, and Sidkiyahu's requested for help to who? Pharaoh in Egypt, which is alluded to but not expressed in Yirmiyahu 37, 5 through 7. So in Yirmiyahu 37, 5 through 7, he says, I started 5 through 7, doesn't give enough of the picture. I started the first pasuk. He says, Vayimlach Melech Sidkiyahu ben Yoshiyahu tachas Kanayahu ben Yoakim asher yimlich asher yimlich Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar put him on the throne. Why did he put him on the throne? Melech Bavel be'eretz Yehuda. He didn't put him on because he liked him, because the other king was carried off in chains. And he put him up there because he expected him to toe the line. The lo shama, we're referring to Tzidkiyahu, did not listen. Hu v'yavadav. I'm Horace. El divrei Hashem. What did God say? Asher diber biyad Yirmiyahu hanavi. In other words, they didn't take the message coming from God through Yirmiyahu. Vayishlach hamelech Tzidkiyahu es Yehuchal ben Shelemya yes Zephaniyahu ben Maaseya HaKohen el Yirmiyahu hanavi lemar. Listen to this. And they sent them to the Yirmiyahu. And what did they say? Hispalelna ba'adenu el Hashem Elokeinu. You know, it's also it's Hashem Elokeinu. He's our God too. Please, daven for us. The Yirmiyahu ba, the Yotze betoch ha'am, and he went among the people. The lo nosnu oso beis hachli. He was not yet imprisoned. He was still, free to walk around. And we know later he was. The Chel Paro Yotzom in Mitzrayim. And the Egyptian army left Egypt by Yishba'u Akastim Hatzarim, and the oppressive Chaldeans heard about this. He says, Al Yerushalayim es Shema'am by Ya'alu Me'al Yerushalayim. He says, Paro's army heard of this, and they withdrew from Jerusalem. Where do you think they were going? They're going to Egypt. It says, Vayhi devar Hashem el Yirmiyahu navi lemar. Kol mar Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Doesn't say Elokechem. It's Elokei Yisrael. I infer from that, the real followers of God. Ko tomru el Melech Yehuda. This is what you tell Tzidkiyahu. He says, Hasholech eschem elai l'darsheni, to approach me. Ine chel paro hayotze lochem, Paro's army, who is going to you, le'ezra shav yartzo Mitzrayim. They went back to Egypt. Why? Because if they're out of the land, Paro will walk in and take the whole place over without even a fight. He said, you're asking me for help? He says, you didn't listen, and this is what happened. So let's go further. So they say he was a completely righteous person, he said. And the picture that the Chachamim give at Tzidkiyahu is a different picture. And the picture is rounded out by an incredible Gemara in the Durham Daf Samachayam and Aleph. Listen to this. It's talking about Nidarim. It's about what? Nidarim, oaths. And one type of an oath, he says, is an Allah. Allah is sometimes referred to as a curse. Here it's referred to as an oath. He says, Ein Allah ela shvur. And a law is nothing more than an oath. Ichsiv, because it is written, by Avo Oso be'Allah. You know who Oso is? He, Nebuchadnezzar, brought him, Tzidkiyahu, under an oath. And in reference to Allah, it is written, the Gam Melech Nebuchadnezzar Morad. And he says, Asher Hishpiu Belohim Chayim. Tzidkiyahu also rebelled, not only against God. This is the perfectly righteous Tzidkiyahu, which don't ask me how you reconcile it, because that's above my pay grade. Rebelled against the king Nebuchadnezzar, who made him swear an oath by the Almighty.
Look at that oath in the name of Hashem.
Ma, he says, Marduse. What was the nature of Tzidkiyahu's rebellion? Listen to this. Ashkechei Tzidkiyahu Nebuchadnezzar, Dahava ke'ochel arnova chaya. Tzidkiyahu once found Nebuchadnezzar eating either a live rabbit or an uncooked rabbit, a barbarous act, any way you look at it. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was afraid Tzidkiyahu would publicize what he had seen. Amalei, he said to Tzidkiyahu, Ish tabali lo maglis ilovai lo tipuk milsa. Swear to me, you're not going to tell anybody what I did, so the matter will not get out to the public. Because if the matter got out to the public, that could topple his malchus. If you got a barbarian, not talking about Conan here, you got a barbarian who's the emperor of the most powerful force in the world. Maybe I don't like that so much. And what did he do? Ishtaba. He swore. The sof havakam it's tired. Tzidkiyahu begufei. Tzidkiyahu suffered physically because he couldn't reveal what he saw. The Ichil Ashwase, and he went to Sanhedrin to be released from the oath. And they granted his request. V'amar. And then he said what he had seen. What was this? This is a major rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar, and he broke his word. So the Gemara continues. Shama Nebuchadnezzar dekam nevazin lay. You heard that people were making fun of him for what he did. And it says in the note, Medrash Tanchuma, other kings got wind of the incident and mocked Nebuchadnezzar, saying, see to whom the rulership of this land belongs, the one who eats a live rabbit? And he knew that Tzidkiyahu must have let it out of his hat. Shalach, ba'aiti Sanhedrin with Tzidkiyahu. He sent messengers and they brought Sanhedrin and Tzidkiyahu to him. Nebuchadnezzar. Amar lahu, he said to the Sanhedrin, Chazisun mai ka'ovet Tzidkiyahu. Did you see what Tzidkiyahu did? Lav hachi ishtaba bishma deshmai delo megalina. Didn't he swear in the name of heaven not to reveal my secret? And he revealed it. Amrulay, itchale ashru asa. He petitioned us to release him from his oath, and we granted the release. Therefore, he was permitted to reveal the secret. Amar lahu, he said to them, Netashlin ashru asa. So he asked them a halachic question. Do you then permit people to petition for the release from an oath? Amrulay, in, yes. Amar lahu, he said to them, Bifanav, or fil shalo bifanav. Meaning, is it permissible only in the presence of the one to whom the oath was sworn, or even not in his presence? Amrulay, bifanav. Only in his presence. Amar lahon, atun my avdisun. So what did you do? My time Allah amrisun with Tzidkiyahu. Why didn't you tell Tzidkiyahu that you couldn't release him from this oath unless I was there. Miyad yoshvu la'aretz yidmu ziknei bas Sion. And once Nebuchadnezzar commanded, sit on the ground and shut up, elders of the daughter of Zion. On Rabbi Yitzchak, sheshabtu borim matachtehem. This means they removed the cushions from beneath the members of Sanhedrin and forced them to sit on the ground. What we're saying is they were accorded tremendous deference by the king. He brought out golden chairs with cushions on them for Sanhedrin to sit on. And when he heard they didn't uphold their own laws, he took the cushions and he threw them on the ground. And you know what else he did? He tied their hair to the backs of animals and had them dragged through the streets until they were dead. So that's a little bit, and that comes from Eicha Rabbah. It's a little bit about what breaking an oath and what Tzidkiyahu was really, really about. Now, in order to bring about Yerushalayim's downfall, it's like Hashem needs a reason. God caused Tzidkiyahu to rebel. One, Tzidkiyahu, quote, the perfect tzaddik, would not do so under normal circumstances. He was bound by an oath of loyalty. Therefore, he is exposed to an occurrence which Nebuchadnezzar is degraded in his eyes, says the Medrash Tanchuma. And it has a variant reading. Tzidkiyahu saw Nebuchadnezzar eating with saliva drooling on his beard. He said, is this the man to whom the whole world should be subjugated? Having lost his respect for the king, Tzidkiyahu wins annulment of his oath of secrecy and talks disparagingly about Nebuchadnezzar, says the Gemara. So two things have now happened by divine providence. Tzidkiyahu feels that he ought not to be subservient to Nebuchadnezzar, whom he deems unworthy, and he has violated the spirit of his shavua to the king. Under the circumstances, it became easier for him, meaning Tzidkiyahu, to submit to the pressures within his kingdom, to break the oath of loyalty, and to seek an Egyptian alliance against Babylon, which God expressly forbade. God had not placed this thought directly in his mind. Providence had been limited to creating the background against which it became possible. Tzidkiyahu should, in fact, have remained loyal in spite of everything. And Yechezkel castigates him severely for this lack of loyalty to an oath. In other words,
With the God's name.
you made an oath, Elokim Chayim, to the living God. True, you made it to a barbarian, but you made it, and you broke our law, and you lied. And you got the Sanhedrin in cahoots with you, and he saw through it. This is the lengths that God had to do. This is the depth of depravity that permeated this quote unquote golden nation. That was
Brian.
Let me
Yeah,
finish.
Brian. No.
Yes, David.
No, but the king should not be creating foreign policy that would affect the entire country just because he thinks someone eats a rabbit alive or something like that. You know, you don't like the person's habits and so on. You have to respect the right thing that's for your people. And so that's kind of a very weak story on that, you know, based on the fact that he didn't like the guy there, he blew his nose into his hand or something, whatever it is, you know, something disgusted him. You don't base policy on how to run your people, especially if God tells you not to. That's kind of very weak. For example, I'll give you a very easy example, something we all live with. There are plenty of people, maybe not me, but who follow the Republican Party. And many people might feel that the past leader, was an idiot in many ways or a crude person, but they like his policies. So you follow him. You don't just say, well, he's a womanizer or he said this, that, I can't do it. You follow what you feel is best for the greater good. So that it just doesn't make sense that that's how a king would take his country down based on it. It also doesn't make sense that because the king chose wrong, the whole country has to be ground into the dirt in such a terrible way. Because you don't punish a whole country and a whole nation just because the king made a bad choice.
So let me ask you a question. It's great. Every little boy, little girl knew the laws of Tum and Tyra. Did that mean that their parents were ethical business people? I mean, if you look into the other events in the other Nevi'im, in Yirmiyahu, you'll see what the people were like, what the women were doing. We talked about the prophetesses and selling the vuos. It wasn't as simple as that. In my limited understanding, Yirmiyahu said, I'm tied in a knot. He said, he put me on the throne to be a puppet. He's a boor.
Ezekiel.
He put me on the throne to do his bidding, and I caught him doing something, and I can't do it, and I need to get him out of office. What is my weapon? What do I do? Now, you and I say, okay, big deal. But who knows what the mentality was then? Maybe the behavior of a king was supposed to be on a different level, and this was unbefitting a king, and behavior is unbefitting a king, then the king is unbefitting a throne. But that was the case he's trying to raise. I can only make my excuse for it. You bring a equally valid point to anything I could raise. Anybody else? Any feelings about this? Well, this is exactly as far as I wanted to go today, to lay the groundwork for where we are. And B'siyata D'Shmaya, when we next meet, we'll go into the parak itself. And among the floweriest, the most florid language that we will see in the Navi and the consequences. So thank you everybody for being here. I wish you all a good night. And if you wish to get a copy of the recording that we made, I'll be happy to send it to you. Just send me a message and I'll take care of it. And we've already wished David a full shlema.
And we're happy to see you back, Brian. And you're looking good. You're looking good. You sound good. Thank God.
This is really a cardboard cutout. This is not me. If you pick up the stick, the head goes up. You put it down, it goes down. I'm telling you. Thank you, David. Everybody be well. Have a good night.
You too.
Okay, next week again.
Siyata D'Shmaya. Be well, everyone.
Stay well.
Thank you.
If you
Thank
want
you.
a copy, just let me know and I'll send it to you.
Okay.